As Noah said, my name is Donna Barkson, and I'm an experienced design manager here at State Farm. My specialty really is content strategy, specifically using storytelling as a technique for understanding users, creating solutions, and presenting those solutions to your stakeholders. So I'm going to help you learn how to create and use stories to help define your experience designs, even if you've never used storytelling before. So you'll see this is going to be easy. But before we get started, I wanted to have a little fun. So here's a couple of fun facts I wanted to share with you about storytelling. So Albert Einstein, he's pretty smart, right? He was a big fan of fairy tales. He famously said, if you want your children to be intelligent, read them fairy tales. If you want them to be more intelligent, read them more fairy tales. I thought that was awesome. We're going to talk more about fairy tales later today, believe it or not. The next fun fact, anthropologists believe many folk tales are thousands of years old, including Beauty and the Beast. What? So our Neolithic ancestors, and those are the people who were around at the end of the Stone Age, maybe known as the New Stone Age. The Neolithic ancestors, they actually knew the story of Beauty and the Beast, and they would tell that story. So it's weird to me. I mean, I kind of picture Fred Flintstone and what is it, Betty and Wilma? What was their idea of beauty? So I would be interested to know what that exact story was, but it's still fascinating nonetheless that Beauty and the Beast is at least thousands of years old. And this one is really amazing to me. Every culture on this earth has some version of Cinderella. The oldest version coming from China around the year 860. What? That's right. In the Chinese version, however, Cinderella's character was not visited by her fairy godmother, but she was visited by her murdered mother's spirit that came to her in the form of a fish. So anyway, all right, we better get started. Enough fun stuff. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we're going to learn why stories resonate with people, why stories increase our feelings of compassion and empathy, why stories help humans make sense out of chaos. So we're going to talk about the why. We're going to talk about the how. We'll learn the essential elements common to all good stories. Think conflict and resolution, colorful characters, and detailed backdrops. We'll learn the when to tell a good story. So you're going to learn why to tell a good story, how to write a good story, and when to tell a good story. It doesn't have to have a dead fish in it or a murdered mother who comes back as fish, but we're going to talk about how to write a good story. Okay, so why do we tell good stories? Well, it's innate. We already talked about they're thousands of years old, that even, cavemen told stories. So it's human nature. Since the dawn of time, humans have been storytellers. Anthropologists tell us that storytelling is central to human existence, that it's common to every known culture. Humans detect patterns from stories, helping us make sense out of chaos. And as noted earlier, even our Neolithic ancestors told stories. It's crazy, right? Storytelling is a powerful way humans have taught social norms throughout our existence. Science. Scientists tell us there's a scientific reason humans love a good story. It turns out when we relate to a story, our levels of the hormone oxytocin increase. Oxytocin is dubbed the feel-good hormone, and it boasts emotions like trust, compassion, and empathy. I know I could use some of that, especially in 2020 here. And then there's the psychology behind storytelling. According to psychologists, stories are a way for humans to take control over their environment. And according to research, stories help us understand each other, which in turn makes us more empathetic in real life. Stories help us find commonality with others. And stories help us influence the opinions and thoughts of our listeners. They're very persuasive. So I'm going to say that one more time. Stories help us influence the opinions and thoughts of others. So if you're trying to persuade somebody at your company or a user, just remember Stories are very powerful. So now let's talk about how to construct a good story. We know why we need to. Now let's talk about how do you do it. So look no further than fairy tales to see how good stories are constructed. Fairy tales have memorable characters, notable settings, exciting plots with plenty of conflict, and an eventual happy ending. These same elements apply to storytelling and experience design. Okay, let's talk about these 4 elements. First, you have to have good characters. So like fairy tales, good experience designs start with well-defined characters with hopes, dreams, aspirations, like Snow White and Little Red Riding Hood. We've all heard these stories, and so now we all know a lot about these characters. Just by hearing these stories, we now have a deep understanding of these characters and their challenges. In experience design, well-defined characters come in the form of personas. Bringing your personas to life is key to storytelling and experience design. So I'm going to say that again because it's really important. Bringing your personas to life is key to storytelling and experience design, but we're going to touch on that a little bit more later. Okay, you have to have a great setting. In fairy tales, enchanted forests are often used to create these colorful settings and backdrops. These backdrops stir up visions of scary creatures lurking in the dark, like the big bad wolf. These hidden dangers and excitement and drama grab our attention. In experience design, the customer journey provides colorful setting and backdrop. While we hope no scary creatures like the big bad wolf lurk in the dark spaces, these journeys do contain the dangers or problems customers face. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. Okay, so we've talked about the characters and the setting. What about the conflict? No fairy tale exists without a good plot driven by conflict. Plots consist of a sequence of events with increasing conflict until a climax is reached. Picture Little Red Riding Hood on her way to Grandma's house. The drama builds, the excitement builds. In experience design, the conflict or drama is born out of the customer's journey where they encounter pain points, sometimes resulting in a roadblock. As mentioned earlier, conflict grabs our attention in fairy tales, and these user pain points we find in our users' journeys should also grab our attention. All right, so we've talked about characters, setting, conflict. What about resolution? So every fairy tale has a happy ending or a happily ever after. These and they lived happily ever after moments leave the audience feeling satisfied and relieved, right? In experience design, the goal is the same: resolve the conflict and leave the user feeling satisfied. Okay, now we know why we need to tell a story. We kind of know how to tell a story. Now let's talk about applying what we've just learned to user experience design. So far we've learned why to create rich, detailed stories to better understand the user experience. We've learned how to create stories to help solve user pain points. And we're going to talk now about when you should apply storytelling. Okay, so we talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's really key. So if you've zoned out through all this presentation, just pay attention to this one piece and you're going to get something out of it. So bring your personas to life. This is key. So as you know, personas are fictional characters used to help experience designers understand an archetypical customer, right? Most provide a list of attributes like motivations, frustrations. These personas are built from data you've researched on your customer or your users. Before starting a project, though, bring that list of attributes to life. So let's create an example. So for example, it's not enough to know your persona is a millennial who has a lot of college debt, or that he's single and he lives in an urban area. You got to add more details like James just graduated from college and he has over $30,000 in student loans to pay. He just launched his first real job and it pays well, but he's doubling down on his student loan payments, leaving him with a small budget for fun things. So he's frugal with his discretionary funds. So you get the idea. So let me talk about that a second more. You take your persona, which is just usually a list of attributes. Maybe there's some demographics in there. But when you don't do it on your persona, but as you start a project, maybe in your groups when you first meet and you kick off your work, just say, let's create a story around this persona that we're going to use today. So you get the idea, right? The point is to really know your persona like you would a friend, or at least as well as you know Snow White and Little Red Riding Hood. So word of caution though, as you create a story around your persona, you have to stay within the data you use to create that persona. You're just adding rich details to that data. You're not changing it or adding any details that weren't found in the original data. Okay, we can talk about that more later if we have time at the end, but this is just really key. Okay, next you're going to take that persona, but now you kind of know this persona a little better. It's more than just numbers and lines on a persona, right? Now you know a little bit more about this person's life. So you're going to take that persona and you're going to walk them through the user journey. User journeys help experienced designers and stakeholders stay focused on user needs, right? By first crafting a story with rich details about the users, experienced designers and stakeholders gain more empathy and understanding when you walk that user through the journey. And remember, this is also where we find that conflict. So take our persona James, for instance. We know he will be put off by extra or hidden fees, right? By walking a real person through a process or journey, solutions stay focused on ways to make his life better and to help him reach his goals. So in James's case, he wants to spend less and get more, right? So he needs transparency up front, no surprises for James. So let's say you're working on a project and you find there are extra fees at the end, like maybe service fees or shipping fees. Well, knowing how frugal James would react may entice designers to add these fees up front, potentially saving a conversion. So now that we brought our persona to life, that's our character, right? We walk that persona through the user journey, that's our backdrop or setting. We found all the pain points, that's our conflict. Hopefully, we've designed a solution, that's our resolution. So we've hit all four elements of a good story. So what's left? Well, now you want to tell your story to others. So you've done all the work, you've come up with a great design, you think you've covered all the pain points and you've solved what you needed to solve, you really understood your user. Well, now you don't want to just show that design to your stakeholders. Start by telling them the story first. So it's all about presenting your work and justifying your design choices. So before presenting your work to your stakeholders, you want to start with that user story. You know, it doesn't have to take an hour to 20 minutes. Just real quickly tell them, you know, we use this persona. Here's what we think his life is like. So who is that person? What is their day-to-day life like? What was their journey through your product or service? What pain or frustration were we causing them? Then show them how you solved for it. So by telling that full, rich story, stakeholders now also stay focused on the user, and they're going to better understand those solutions you came up with. So let's wrap up what we've learned. So we learned why we should tell stories, that stories are innate and they're part of human nature. They help us create order out of clutter and chaos. They help us see and understand patterns, and they help us connect and build empathy for others. We learned how to create these stories, right? Starting with good characters by bringing personas to life. We learned to walk our personas through the user journey, which is our backdrop or setting. We learned these user journeys is where we find the conflicts and pain points. And we learn to solve for these conflicts based on our persona. In other words, we find the resolution. Lastly, we learned when to tell these stories, including before presenting work to our stakeholders. So I just want to stress that by taking the extra time to walk your stakeholders through the story, they too are going to gain more empathy and they're going to better see the conflict and the resolutions you've created. So I hope this has helped you a little bit. I would love to talk more about personas. I really love to talk about personas, user journeys, anything else you might have on your mind that you want to ask me about. I'm excited to help you.
So that was great, Donna. So we'll move on to the Q&A now. Check the question and answer box and upvote any questions you're interested in and add new questions if you have any. And we'll go ahead and dive in. I see a few that have some upvotes already. All right, so Donna, are there any specific narrative structures that you find useful in this type of work?
So I don't really know what you mean by narrative structures. I would just say you really have to start. I guess if you had to say narrative structure, you would start with these personas. And I do see a couple of questions about personas, and I'm going to jump on those too. You're going to take that user and you're going to say, what is it like for them, our product or our service? And you're going to start from the very beginning. Don't start on the piece you're working on. Start on the piece where your user came in. So let's say, in my case, I work on .com or I work on chatbot. I probably was in the beginning. It could be they got an email that got them started, or they got started on an ad they saw on Facebook, whatever. So just remember, when you do those user journeys, that's going to be part of that narrative. You have to start from the beginning of the story. Don't just tell your little chapter of the story. I'm not sure that I answered that question exactly, but I hope that I did.
I mean, it sounds like there's kind of a beginning, middle, and end to a story, right? And that kind of structure, maybe. I don't know if I interpret the question either, right? But interesting. Let's move to the next one.
Conflict should come in the middle, and the resolution should come at the end. We know that much.
That's great. And so we'll move to the next one. This had the most upvotes so far, and I think it leads into the conversation more about personas. This question from Maddie is, what kind of user research and how much do you need before creating your personas? And how many personas do you need?
Okay, that's a great question. I love talking about personas. So it really depends on the size of your product or company, how many users you have. So I work for State Farm. We have a ton of customers, right? We have so many that we had to do a lot more research than maybe a smaller company would do. The trick is, remember, these are representations of groups. So it's not like a persona is really one person. It's really not. You take that data and you start putting together the things that are alike. So you find out, well, 30% of our customers are like this, 20% are like that. So it could be your company has 2 persona types. It could be it has 4. So I don't think you really need too many. I wouldn't go and get like 13. That's too many. That's crazy. You probably could look at that data and combine it down a little better, but it really just depends on the size of your company. I hope that helped you.
That's great. And the next of these questions that's kind of related to that up here, and the phrasing is maybe a little ambiguous, but we'll do our best. What they've asked is, what if we have different personas in the research? My interpretation is that means, what if our personas from the research don't match with our previous groupings of users, would be my best guess. Or maybe maybe the other thing would be if what we learn about users doesn't match with what we think we knew about users. I'm not sure which of those things it is.
Yep, I was going to say, it sounds like maybe your team had something in mind and the research didn't back you up. But you probably have to go with that research, And I want to point this out too. A lot of times people confuse marketing personas with user personas. So it could be your company is missing a customer and they've created a marketing persona, which is not really a customer you have. It's one you want to have. So that could be the disconnect. Like you were talking about a marketing persona, but your research of your real customers showed a different type of customer.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. So the next of these, there's like a battle going on of what has the most votes, but this one has the most now. So Gabriella asks, sometimes we tend to focus more on jobs to be done instead of personas. How would you still integrate that and make sure to create empathy while storytelling without personas?
Well, it's difficult to create empathy without a persona. I mean, empathy is a human to human thing, so it's kind of difficult to have that empathy if you don't at least have some type of person in your mind. So I think that you really can't. You really have to think about some vision or version of a customer or a user of your product or service. And I really want to stress, I know this sounds funny, but when you look at if you do have personas, or you think you have some data on your customer, let's say you think most of my customers are 35 they live in urban areas, blah, blah, blah. That's really not enough. Don't change that persona, leave it like a canvas like that. But every time you take a product or a project, take that persona and say, okay, what do we know about this person? Well, it could be that they're married, they have 2 kids. You really want to understand them a little better. And these are throwaways. They're not permanent, right? So it's just before your projects, just in your group, talk about, let's see what story we can write around this person, and just keep that in mind for your project. When you do your next project, take that data, but create
Donna,
a different person.
Donna, we lost you for a moment.
Oh.
I don't think that's just me. Sorry, I cut just for a moment.
I'm like so sad. Where was I in my story? Anyway. Shout out to my friend Twain, by the way. Hi, Twain.
All right. Should we move to the next question?
Would we get a link to rework? I don't know. No, I believe said yes. There are different ways to create user journeys. What tips do you recommend to avoid group bias when crowdsourcing and conducting design workshops? It's a little out of my milieu. We have experts that help us with that here at State Farm. Not sure. There's one related to, can personas be contextual or very dependent on product? Okay, I'll take a stab at this one. That's a good question. I can tell you at my company, we have several different types of personas because we have different types of products, right? We have agents and we have to help them with their software. So we have agent personas, and we have customers, right? So we also have to have customer personas. So you can have different types of personas in your company, if that helps you.
That's great.
Yeah. So it can be very dependent on product, as long as the product is specifically for a different type of target.
Okay. Do you want to pick the next one, or should I? Either way.
Yeah. I think from your last slide, you speak more about extending that funnel through persuasion and your team's path to success. Could you speak more about it? Okay, sure. I think they're talking about persuasion techniques from storytelling. So as you know from this presentation, that storytelling has been used through really and truly through all of humankind. Because when you tell a story, people just can understand better. I didn't go too much into the science and stuff. It's really fascinating. You can just look it up and you'll find all the research on it. But humans told stories on caves with diagrams and stuff they would draw before we even had language. So stories really help us understand and visualize concepts. So it really is a very persuasive way to try and speak to somebody. Think about how many times you want to understand a concept and somebody says, well, let me give you an example. That's really just a way of telling you a story. So very often, if you try to understand something and you can't get it, and somebody says, well, let me give you an example, all of a sudden you go, oh, yeah, okay, I get it. So that's what they say, scientists and so forth, about why they're so persuasive. We just understand them better. We get it better. We can visualize what you're saying to us better. We can find those patterns in those stories.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Still have a few more minutes if you want to.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, and I did really want to leave with a lot of conversation, because I know a lot of times people love to talk about personas and user journeys. And I see that we do have a lot of questions about user journeys and so forth. Let's see. Do we have any tools for creating persona with respect to accessibility? That's kind of interesting question, and accessibility is very important. We definitely care about that very, very much here at State Farm. But I think that just depends on how you produce those personas. Like, for example, I think I have one over here, we just have cards and we have just all kinds of things. So no, this wouldn't be very accessible in that form for certain people. So you would have to just create. It just depends on how you create them. We have them in digital, we have them in print. So you would just have to produce them in a way that would meet everyone's expectations.
That's great.
Yeah.
Do you make a distinction, Donna, between personas and user profiles? I know we do at HFI a lot of the time, but not everyone does.
Not really. We talked about it a lot in our research, but we really use the personas to help us understand our customers. We spend a lot of time, money, research upfront. I'm telling you, it's all based on research. So you really have to put in the time to get them correct. And I got to tell you, you got to take more than one stab at it, because you can get data overload and you think you've analyzed that data, but then keep doing it and keep honing in on that data until you really get it down to where you find those things that you can synthesize.
So it sounds like you think of the persona as having a lot of detail as well.
Yes, but thank you for bringing that up. You don't want too much detail in there because you want them to be usable, right? So, you want things that are important. So, for example, here at State Farm, we have a lot of different digital products. We have apps and we have chatbots. We have a lot of different digital products. So there's certain things that we need that maybe somebody that just has a website doesn't need, right? So just keep the data that you need and don't have too much in there.
Yeah. I guess it's a question of who your audience is for the personas. If you think of them as being for the UX staff or for other staff, right?
Right.
Do you want to speak to that a little bit? Which of those audiences do you think of the personas being for?
UX staff, or what was your other one?
Oh, UX staff or the non-UX staff. So developers and managers and those kinds of folks.
Well, it's definitely for your stakeholders too. So, and by stakeholders are your business partners, whoever your client is, right? And definitely for the experience design team. So it really helps your business partners, your stakeholders, if they understand these personas too. One, they're the ones who drive the requirements and, set up the feature, come back and request new features and so forth. So as user experience design team, my team, we would use those personas to help us build these products, but our stakeholders need to understand these customers so they can help know what features are missing or what's missing. So it's definitely important for stakeholders and experience designers. I don't know here that our developers get too much into it, but we definitely do share them with our developers.
That's great. Thanks for answering that. It wasn't one of the pre-written questions, but I couldn't help but ask. All right, Donna. Any other questions jump out at you? Because I think we're pretty much at time, but if there's any that are burning on your mind you wanted to address. So I know you've been looking through the Q&A. Any remaining ones that...
I like that question. I'm going to tell you though, I think now it's the Cinderella story with the fish, the Chinese version of Cinderella. No, I don't know. It's a good one.
Fantastic. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Donna.
Thanks, everybody. You're welcome.
Please give her a